Yeah.
and the Milwaukee Bucks hire Adrian Griffin. And basically, Adrian Griffin's a first time head coach. Okay, nothing wrong with that there. And then they bring in Terry Stotts after they trade for Damian Lillard. If you don't know who Terry Stotts is, he was the longtime head coach with the Portland Trail Blazers when they drafted Damian Lillard. He was the one coaching them when they famously upset the Houston Rockets when LaMarcus Aldridge had like back-to-back games of 42 points, and then Damian Lillard ended up hitting one of the most iconic shots in NBA history, falling away, leading them to victory over that. And then early in the season, before the season even started, Terry Stotts is like, I don't like the way you're using Damian Lillard. I'm out. And then he just bounces. First red flag. And then after that, Adrian Griffin turns to Thanasis and he's like, what exactly do you do here? And then Giannis is like, no, you don't talk about my brother like that. Thanasis is going to be on this team and just pick up basically a check just to be here, just to back me up on the bench. So, second red flag is he questions why Thanasis is even on the team. And a lot of people have that question, but it's just something you don't do with Giannis. And then him and Dame kind of just fall out of love with him. But really, people were pointing to the defense for the Milwaukee Bucks being the problem. And it's like, okay, let's talk about the defense of the Milwaukee Bucks. So you trade away Drew Holiday, who's arguably the best on-ball defender in the NBA, and you trade him to Damian Lillard, who's arguably one of the worst on-ball defenders in the NBA. As far as defensive win shares, he ranks 83rd. There are 30 teams in the NBA, and there are 5 starters on all of those teams, so Damian Lillard doesn't even rank as a starter as far as a defender. And then they start getting lit up by all of these teams, and I'm like, as soon as that trade happens, I'm like, you just sacrificed your defense and you're going to have more scoring, but who is going to stop anybody on the perimeter? You're going to have Brook Lopez, you're going to have Giannis, but Pat Connaughton, Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton is old at this point. It's like, you're not going to get it done on defense. So ends up the defensive scoring was too much. Adrian Griffin and Damian Lillard were not vibing, and Giannis wasn't vibing at all. And then they end up firing him. And then we get the news that they're looking at Doc Rivers, who went to Marquette. So he is in Wisconsin. He's a hometown guy there, and he's been consulting with them all year long. So he knows the situation. So I'm like, wait a minute. When Doc Rivers got fired all playoff season, what were we talking about with Doc Rivers? Well, we were talking about the failures of Doc Rivers, and it was being 6-10 in game sevens, blowing 3 separate 3-1 leads with different teams. It was collapsing when he would have 3-2 leads repeatedly and being known as a choker. And Doc Rivers was pretty much toxic to hire, and he was radioactive. So my theory was the Bucks probably wanted to hire Doc Rivers in the offseason. You hire a sacrificial lamb in Adrian Griffin, and then once the media calms down with Doc Rivers, it's like, well, who else could we have hired midseason besides Doc Rivers? Who else has championship experience? He's a defensive head coach. I mean, our problem is defense, even though we traded away the best defender in the league. What say you?
Yeah, this was very questionable for me. I think of Adrian Griffin's hire. It reminds me of a lot of David Blatt when the Cleveland Cavaliers hired him.
Yeah.
And then he was kind of like their sacrificial lamb. And although I think the circumstances then were a little differently, but they fired David Blatt. He was definitely over his head. I think Adrian Griffin to some extent also was just handling the Eagles on that team.
Yeah.
They move on. They hire a relatively big name. I mean, Tyronn Lue at the time was definitely a marketable name. But then they have Doc Rivers. And this for me, you mentioned Terry Stotts, you mentioned Adrian Griffin, and now you mentioned Doc Rivers. This Bucks team makes me nervous for everything you mentioned there. With first that head coach and all the egos that are there, with this lore with Thanius, which I understand why he's there. Obviously, he's his brother there, kind of similar. Just having a
Like James Jones on all LeBron's teams, just picking up free rings.
yeah, sure, or there's the Curry brothers or whatever, the Gronkowski brothers were there together at the same time. But this Bucks team makes me nervous because, first of all, you had Mike Budenholzer at one point, and you downgraded, and now you have Doc Rivers, who Doc Rivers is like the best worst coach of all time, where we think of him so fondly. We think of him as, championship with the '08 Celtics and all this stuff, when really we should look at him as the 3-1 Doc Rivers, the guy who has blown You mentioned, I think he's blown 4 3-1 leads. He had it with the Clippers, he had it with the Magic, and he had it with another team as well. Blown all these leads. The locker rooms, we talk about all the locker rooms that he's been with. The Magic hated him. The Celtics big three hated him. Rajon Rondo and him almost got in a fist fight during practice at certain points.
Yeah.
Chris Paul was not a fan of Doc Rivers. Blake Griffin wasn't a fan of him. DeAndre Jordan, the Sixers, Joel Embiid wasn't a fan. Neither was James
Yeah.
Harden. So, like, Doc Rivers, you talk about a guy who's like, kind of like he's a buzzworthy name, and he has all these things that they like about him. But at the same time, everywhere he's gone, not only has he choked in 3-1 leads or 3-2 leads, but he's also had everybody, prominent players, have spoken out about how much they hated him.
Yeah.
And now he's going to a Bucks team that clearly has chemistry issues. So that's my concern so far.
Yeah. And it's like a Bucks team that has chemistry issues. I don't think that's even the biggest deal because I think Giannis and Dame can figure it out offensively. But my point really is you traded away Drew Holiday when you should have found a way to trade away Chris Middleton instead, because while Chris Middleton is taller, whenever they played the Celtics in the playoffs, who was guarding Jason Tatum? Drew Holiday. Who was guarding Jimmy Butler? Drew Holiday. He was their on-ball defender. And then you trade away that defense, and it's like, okay, well, who is going to stop even like someone like Terry Rozier, Tyrese Halliburton? Who is going to stop Jaylen Brown? Who is going to stop Jason Tatum? Who's going to stop Drew Holiday? Who is going to stop Derek White? Who is going to stop Kristaps Porzingis? And you're going up against all of these teams now where it's like, okay, you sacrifice defense for offense. And it's different with the Cleveland Cavaliers because you had really good defenders on that team, but the Milwaukee Bucks simply don't have the perimeter defense to even fix those issues or give Doc Rivers a chance to remedy this. And then you look at Josh Rivers, it's like Doc Rivers, it's like, who is he blowing 3-1 leads to? Like, that's a great question. And it was the Clippers year. You blew a 3-1 lead. So not only was it James Harden was on the bench when they came back. This was to the likes of Josh Smith and Corey Brewer. Like, that's a major red flag there. And then also, you've lost 5 games at home in game 7s, and then you lost the game 7 to Miami when you were up by 13 points and you had a 3-2 series lead. You won 3 straight games, and then you're up 13. Cedric Maxwell famously ready to present the trophy to the Celtics, and then you blow that one. You lose to the Boston Celtics with the Philadelphia 76ers, where James Harden bails on you. Joel Embiid is having his MVP season, and then you get absolutely wrecked by the Celtics in game 7, and it's not even a competition. And then this is a team that just lost to the Miami Heat with Kyle Lowry. The Miami Heat just added Terry Rozier. That wasn't a fluke that they beat the Milwaukee Bucks, and now you're less defense, and this is a guy who's not just someone who can go in there and fix chemistry issues. He's someone who also has chemistry issues with players. He's a coach that has the ego of an NBA player, so at this point I'm like, this is just a disaster for the Milwaukee Bucks. And then you had Mike Budenholzer, who took you to an NBA Finals and won it. I really don't see why there was a huge justification. Sure, you lost to Miami in the first round. Giannis got hurt. Like, Giannis was hurt for the majority of that series, and Giannis missed a game. So it's like, okay, give him another chance at least, because he's taken you and proven that he can win an NBA Finals with that team. And he is a more modern coach than Doc Rivers. You can't blame the defense on Adrian Griffin, who's a rookie head coach, when you trade away all your perimeter defense for Damian Lillard, who can fill up the stat sheet. But at the end of the day, I don't see them beating the Boston Celtics. The only time they have beat the Boston Celtics is the Kyrie Irving year. Every other year, Jason Tatum goes to Milwaukee, down 3-2, drops 46 on Giannis, and then they just shoot the lights out on him in the game 7 that year. I don't see them beating Miami. So this is an absolute disaster, and Doc Rivers is not a band-aid. This is like, oh, we have a tsunami. Let's pull up some tarp. Maybe we could have some helicopters hover over with some tarp. Maybe that will stop the tsunami from wrecking the city. It's like, I don't think the tarp has the best track record here.